History of my oldest ancestors of whom I am very proud descent. June 17, 1094, conquest of Valencia. After 19 months of siege of the city and calling himself Prince Rodrigo el Campeador, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, El Cid Campeador, my 31st grandfather, 5 times my grandfather, Count de Bivar, Lord of Valencia, mythical Castilian knight, ensign major of Sancho II, King of Castile, the first to use the nickname and arms of Bivar, or Bivar. El Cid was the 5th grandfather of Dom Afonso III, King of Portugal, my 25th and 26th grandfather. El Cid Campeador, named after Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, Count of Bivar, Lord of Valencia, mythical Castilian knight, ensign major of Sancho II, King of Castile, conqueror of Valencia, born in Bivar, perhaps in 1040 and died in Valencia, on July 10, 1099. He was the son of Diego Lainez, Lord of Bivar and Dona Teresa Núñez de Maya. Paternal grandson of Lain Núñez and maternal grandson of Nuno Alvarez de Maya, Lord of Entre de Ro y Minho and Dona Gontran Gutierrez. Through his mother's side, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar was from the family of our Lidador, Don Goncalo Mendez de Maya, who died in Beja, in the year 1170. Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar died at the age of 56, called El Cid, from the Moorish Sidi, Lord, and Campeador, which means champion, was a noble Castilian warrior who lived in the 11th century, a time when Hispania was divided between rival kingdoms of Christians and Moors, Muslims. His life and deeds became the colors of legend, especially due to a song La Canción de Mayo Cid, dated 1207, transcribed in the 14th century by Pedro Abad, whose manuscript is in the National Library of Spain, a reference for knights of the Middle Ages. The image that emerges from this manuscript is that of the idealized medieval knight, strong, brave, loyal, just and pious. But there are other sources that are much less favorable. The story of El Cid Campeador, or Imayo Cid. Don Rodrigo was born in Bivar, a small village close to the city of Burgos, capital of the Kingdom of Castile. He was the son of Diego Flanes, Lord of Bivar, and Dona Teresa Núñez de Maya, daughter of Don Nuno Alvarez de Maya, Lord of Entre de Ro y Minho, member of the high Castilian nobility. Orphaned by his father at the age of 15, he was taken to the court of King Fernando I of Leon, where he became a friend and companion of Infante Sancho. His education took place at the monastery of San Pedro de Cardena, receiving training in letters and laws. With the death of Fernando I, the kingdom was divided between his sons. Castile went to Sancho, Galicia for Garcia, Leo for Afonso, Toro for Elvira, and Zamora to Urraca. It turns out that Sancho did not agree with the division and started to fight for the reunification and expansion of his paternal inheritance under his crown, and in this fight, he had the help of Don Rodrigo, named ensign of the kingdom. Don Rodrigo was 23 years old when he defeated, in a single combat, the ensign of Navarre, Zimino Garces, a feat that earned him the nickname champion, and in the following year he began to be known as El Cid among the Moors. Investing against his brother Afonso, Battle of Golpahira, Sancho took the kingdom of Leon from him and then turned against Zamora, laying siege to the castle where Urraca lived. It was during this siege that Sancho was murdered, in betrayal, by Bellido Dolfos, suspected of being Afonso's agent. Sancho left no heirs and Alfonso VI became king of Castile. But he was only crowned after taking the Santa Gadea oath, demanded by Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, exempting himself from any involvement in his brother's death. After this episode, relations between the king and Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar became increasingly tense, until, in 1081, El Cid was exiled, for the first time, from Castile. At this point, his story is told in 2 different versions. According to La Canción de Mayo Cid, 300 of the best Castilian knights decided to accompany him in exile, making Zaragoza their headquarters and fighting victorious battles against the Moors. According to an alternative version, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar took refuge in the mountains of Aragon, raising a small army whose weapons were put at the service of whoever paid them the most, whether Christian or Muslim. In fact, it is also this alternative source that, when mentioning his marriage to Dona Jimena, daughter of the Count of Oviedo, which took place shortly before his exile, says maliciously that the lady was older than him and very ugly, but she had an enviable heritage. What is certain is that, At that time, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar established ties with the Moorish king of the Taifa of Valencia, Al-Qadir, who became his friend and protege, according to one version, or his client, according to another. It was for the benefit of Al-Qadir that El Cid conquered the small kingdoms of Albarracin and Alpuente. In 1089, the Almoravid Yusuf crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, at the head of a numerous army. The invasion threatened the security of all Spanish kingdoms, and King Afonso asked Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar for help, making him return to Castile. But it didn't take long for hostility to return between the two, and El Cid was exiled for the second time. In the 10 years that followed, the champion's fame grew. Now leading a large army, he conquered and became lord of the Moorish kingdoms of Lerida, Tortosa, Denia, Albarracin, and Alpuente. Around 1093, upon learning of Al-Qadir's murder, he attacked the Taifa of Valencia, managing to take it on June 17, 1094, after 19 months of siege of the city, and calling himself Prince Rodrigo el Campeador. According to the version that does not ennoble him, Rodrigo had the city governor, Ben Yehaf, implicated in Al-Qadir's death, tortured and then burned alive. And he would not have spared his wife and children if it had not been for the intervention of the noble knights who followed him. The most widespread version maintains that, upon becoming Lord of Valencia, he showed himself to be a fair and balanced ruler. He granted the city a status of justice, implemented the Christian religion but, at the same time, renovated the Muslim mosque, minted coins, and surrounded himself with an Oriental-style court, composed of both Arab and Christian poets, as well as eminent people in the world of laws. But the Almoravids were not inert and presented themselves at the city gates, under the leadership of Muhammad, Yusuf's nephew. After several battles, El Cid obtained a decisive victory, which contributed to making his person the object of heroic and mythical narratives. Until his death, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar governed Valencia in the name of Afonso VII, but, in truth, his power was independent of the king. He tried to increase it, having one of his daughters, Dona Elvira Rodriguez de Bivar, marry Prince Ramiro Sanchez de Pamplona, my 30th grandparents, 5 times my grandparents, and the other, Dona Maria Rodriguez de Bivar, with Count from Barcelona, Ramon Berengario III, my 30th grandparents. The death and legend of El Cid. Contrary to legendary tradition, which enjoys seeing him die heroically in combat, Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, called Campeador or El Cid or Mayo Cid, died in a bed in his castle, in Valencia, the July 10, 1099. It is at this point in history that Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar becomes a legend. The Moors were confident, as they had finally killed El Cid. His wife had his body tied to the horse and his sword to his hand, and sent him to the battlefield. When they saw El Cid on top of his horse, they fled and were pursued and defeated by Don Rodrigo's army. That's why legend has it that Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar won a battle after he died. His remains, together with those of his wife, Dona Jimena, are buried in Burgos Cathedral. The Lusitano Armorial states the following about the arms of Bivar. The weapons of the Bivares are, called to do, the first party, first, quartered in red with a gold castle, Castile, and in silver, with a purple lion, armed with blue, Leo, second, in red, with 4 golden parlors, Aragon, the second in red, with a green home oak, plucked in silver, flanked on the left by a golden lion, the lion of the shield. Family and descent. The marriage between Don Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar and Dona Jimena Diaz de Oviedo, my 31st grandmother, 5 times my grandmother, resulted in 3 children. Don Diego Rodriguez de Bivar. Dona Maria Rodriguez de Bivar, my 30th grandmother, married to Don Pedro de Aragon, and later married to Ramon Berengario III, the Great, Count of Barcelona, my 30th grandfather. Dona Elvira Rodriguez de Bivar, married to Ramiro Sanchez, Infante de Navarra, Lord of Monteiro, my 30th grandparents, 5 times my grandparents.